Welcome back to Module 1, Inventing Ohio, Republics 1744 to 1763. Our focus today is the invention called Ohio, that place where Indians found a measure of independence from Europeans, yet maintained close trade ties to them. This invention relied heavily on the Indians' ability to play the French off the British, to keep one European power at bay by dangling the specter of the other European power. How long could this invention last? How did this invention work? We'll try to answer these questions today by focusing on republics. For our purposes, a republic is a refugee village established for the express purpose of tearing down traditional political hierarchies. In the context of the 18th century, Europeans rightly believed that republic was a bad word, a word that signaled the intent of a group of colonized people to rebel against a monarch, to reject their place within the empire. The refugees who came to Ohio in the first half of the 18th century built new villages, which were the diversely populated centers of these republics. So let's discuss a few examples of republics. Our first example is Pickawillany, along the Miami River in western Ohio, established near modern-day Piqua. Pickawillany was a village of mixed ethnicities led by a refugee who should not have had power. This refugee's name was Memeskia, or Dragonfly. Now the French called him something else, La Demoiselle, or Little Girl, and the British had their own name too, Old Britain. Dragonfly was a nobody, an outsider, someone who rose to power by exploiting a very particular strategy. Dragonfly understood that in this new world, power accrued to those people with the best access to material goods, pots and pans, wool blankets, glass beads, guns. And he understood that good leaders didn't hoard this material for their own benefit. Rather, they redistributed the wealth to the community for the improvement of all. Dragonfly used the British, who were just then starting to mass produce quality, inexpensive products, to rise to power. So Pickawillany became the most important British trading village northwest of the Ohio River. In 1749, there were just 40 warriors. By 1750, there were 400 families. Dragonfly's influence reached across several tribes and into Indiana and Illinois. A second example of an Ohio republic was the village of Sanantio. Sanantio was located where the Scioto meets the Ohio River, near modern-day Portsmouth. One French official described Sanantio this way: as a sort of republic with a very large number of bad characters of various nations. In other words, he saw there the Mingos, the Shawnees, the Delawares, and the Miamis. Indians believed that no other group would attack the village if some of their relatives lived there. It was a defensive mechanism, a shield. But beneath this observation, there was disgust. There was fear. The Frenchman wondered why all of these different people would be gathered in one place. He concluded that they had been seduced by cheap English goods, meaning he believed they had been seduced to leave the French alliance, to accept British power. What he saw in Sanantio was a group of people electing to reject traditional political arrangements, electing to rebel against a European monarch. He saw in these republics a rebellion in action. The French, by the late 1740s, believed they were losing Ohio. So what did they do? They militarized the Ohio country. That is, they sent troops to protect it, to claim it, to show force so that the British would be scared and leave, to show force so that Native Americans would gladly go back to the French. Their leader was Pierre-Joseph Céloron, who set out for Ohio from Lachine, or China, in Canada. His mission was very specific: to rein in Dragonfly and demand that Ohio Native Americans return to the French alliance. Céloron was ordered to pillage towns and evict any British traders that he saw. You can trace Céloron's route on the screen. As he traveled down the Allegheny to modern-day Pittsburgh, and then down the Ohio River, he planted several lead plates, plates that declared that this territory belonged to the King of France. Remember, his ultimate goal was to reach Pickawillany. That was the most dangerous village. That was the most dangerous republic rebelling against the French king. Only one complete plate exists, which you see here. In short, it says, the King of France owns this territory. And by territory, he means the watershed of the Ohio River. And note that he uses two names to describe the river. La Rivière Oyo, Oyo is the Seneca word for Ohio, and La Belle Rivière, the French word meaning the beautiful river. Celeron knew his trip was a failure. At every village he was laughed at, and at Pickawillany he felt especially threatened. So he skedaddled back to Montreal as quickly as possible, where he reported about the conditions in Ohio. And as a result, in 1752, the French sent Charles Langlade to Ohio to succeed where Celeron had failed. Langlade was a Métis, that is, a person of both European and Native American descent. He and 250 other warriors were sent specifically to destroy Dragonfly. And when they reached Pickawillany, they found the town unguarded. Most of the men were out on a hunting trip, leaving older men, women, and children. So they destroyed the town rather easily, and they killed several British traders who were there. And they killed Dragonfly too. And in killing Dragonfly, they sent a message to other Native Americans in Ohio. Do not rebel against the King of France. Now, from 1752 to 1753, the French sent a message to the English. That is, they militarized the eastern border of the Ohio country, what is now the modern-day border between Pennsylvania and Ohio. There, the French built a series of forts stretching from Lake Erie down to modern-day Pittsburgh. The message to the English was, stay out. So was militarization necessary? It's quite possible that the French underestimated the strength of their Native American alliances. After all, the French never intended to settle in Ohio, but clearly the British were. The British were clearly more of a threat to the Native Americans than the French. And it's quite possible as well that the French overestimated the strength of the British. Certainly the British could send traders into Ohio, but they couldn't yet send very many soldiers. But the consequences of militarization, nevertheless, were real. It made Ohio a tense place to be. It was the kind of tension in which the slightest provocation could lead to serious violence. And that's precisely what happened. The British colonists in Virginia and Pennsylvania decided to retaliate against French militarization. They wanted to send their own message to France. You can't keep us out. And so these colonists gathered together a militia consisting of British citizens and their Iroquois allies. And this militia was led by a young Virginian, the son of a wealthy planter. This young Virginian had one life goal, to be an officer in the British Army. There was only one problem. Virginia was considered to be a backwater. The sticks, a place where nobody came from. To be an officer in the British military, you had to come from a well-connected London family. So this mission provided the chance, the opportunity for this young man to prove himself, to make a name for himself. And so the young Virginian was assigned to lead troops to the frontier. It was a dangerous mission going to the border between Pennsylvania and Ohio. There the English and their Indian allies encountered French troops. They skirmished, and they even managed to capture the French officer in charge of the French unit. Here the young, inexperienced Virginian lost control of his soldiers. His Indian allies killed the French officer. They split his skull, they washed their hands in his blood, and they ate his brains. The young Virginian had in fact witnessed and indeed supervised a war crime, and did nothing about it. Several other French soldiers were let go, and they returned to their fort and told their story. As a result, the French army set out after the young Virginian, and they tracked him for several days to a clearing in the forest, a low-lying clearing in a forest near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. For the British troops, the situation was dire. When the French caught up with them, it was pouring rain. The British were exhausted, and their hastily built fort provided no protection from an overwhelming French firepower. To the young Virginian leader, the situation was clear: surrender or die. And so he surrendered, throwing himself at the mercy of the French. They would have had justification had they decided to kill him. Instead, they sent him home with a stern warning: stay out of Ohio. The date of that surrender was July 4th, 1754, and the young, inexperienced Virginian leader whose life was saved by the French that day was, of course, George Washington. And on July 4th, 1754, George Washington stepped out onto the world stage for the first time, triggering what is known as the French and Indian War, which lasted from 1754 to 1763. It was, in fact, the first global war in human history. And it started over a fight about Ohio. Indian republics in Ohio had rebelled against the French monarchy, aided by the British. The French tried to stop these rebels, mainly through intimidation. But intimidation escalated into violent acts, and violent acts often required retribution. The English used Washington's frontier stumble, his wartime atrocity in other words, to declare war, continuing their long struggle for global domination against their French rivals. But the Native Americans fought a parallel war. They asked themselves two questions. First, could the British muster enough force to defeat the French? And the evidence from 1752 to 1754 was no. The French seemed more powerful. They had built forts along the Pennsylvania-Ohio border. They had destroyed the town of Pickawillatee. The second question was who was better for the Ohio Indians, the British or the French? Again, the Indians understood that the British wanted land, and they understood that the French didn't really want to settle Ohio. It seemed as if the French were better for the Ohio Indians. And so many of the Ohio Indians fought for the French, not so the French could win, but so that the Indians could claim an Ohio free of European control. They thought supporting the French was their best bet to accomplish that goal. And they were wrong. The British spent a fortune to defeat the French, and in 1763 the British managed to force the French to surrender. The British went bankrupt, but they evicted the French from North America, and they gained control all the way to the Mississippi River. This was a stinging defeat for the French, a defeat that they would not soon forget. By 1750, emerging republics in Ohio were diversely populated refugee villages. Their goal? To facilitate trade and diplomacy with the Europeans while maintaining Indian independence. The invention of Ohio helped Indians to maintain power over two global empires. However, by the 1760s, the refugee villages were struggling. The British had kicked the French out of North America. So what happened to Ohio as a result? That will be the subject of our next lecture.